2, 3.
Let's get right into how you can camouflage the edges of your decoupage paper when you're decoupaging a project and your paper is not as large as your surface. I have taught hundreds of students in my decoupage masterclass, and the question I get probably more than any other question is, how do I blend the edges of my decoupage paper when my paper is not large enough to cover my entire project? For this project, I did prep my board by stippling on some texture. There's a lot of visual texture in the paper, and we're going to be using texture to camouflage our edge. So I wanted there to be as much consistency as possible. So I start off by misting my decoupage paper with some water. In doing so, the paper is going to expand with the water. So when it comes in contact with my decoupage medium, it does not respond, which results in a beautiful wrinkle-free finish. This is the Roycycled Industrial Exhibition decoupage paper that I'm using to decoupage with today. My demonstration will be using Roycycled decoupage paper, but you can use any thin decoupage paper and use the things you learned today in order to camouflage those as well. I want to be certain that I decoupage my paper down really well, but also that I go over my entire surface to ensure that I have the same sheen both on the paper and on the area that doesn't have any decoupage paper. You'll notice that I have a deckled edge on my paper. It is so much easier to camouflage your edge if you don't have a super straight edge. So often I see people trying to camouflage the edge of their decoupage paper, and they're starting off with a really geometric shape. What happens is when our eyes look at a piece of furniture or a project and we see that straight edge, we automatically pick it up super fast. So it's a lot easier if you either tear your edge to get a nice uneven edge, or my preference is to use a wet paintbrush and to draw along where you want to tear your paper and then pull it. In my holy imagination, you end up with thinner paper at your edges because you end up deconstructing the different layers of paper pulp that make up your paper. Another thing that's super important is to dry in between your layers. For my project today, I'm using Wise Owl's 1 Hour Enamel. It cures a lot faster than most water-based varnish products do, so that I get a nice clean start with each layer and I don't end up with everything being mushy and all muddy together. I'm using a 220 grit sanding block to sand my edges. This is my favorite way to trim my decoupage paper. It's super quick and I end up with a nice clean edge. You guys can see how much texture I have both underneath the paper and on the area that we're going to be camouflaging today. This is going to go a long way to help us get a nice consistent look from the paper to the area that we're going to be decoupaging. Now, when I look at this paper, there are a lot of different colors, and I want to start my base off with the lightest color, and the color that I see that's on the bottom, if you will, of this design. And so when I'm looking on the bottom, I'm seeing a really light blue, and it's a little cooler than the rest of the paper. So I have some blue here that I mixed ahead of time for time's sake, and I'm going to use it as a base, but I know I'm going to have to warm it up because this is still just a little too cool. I'm using a clear sticky note. I love painting swatches on the clear sticky notes because it allows me to set it right on top of my project so I can really compare my colors and make sure that my match is going to be as close as possible. I'm using a really intense yellow to warm up this kind of robin's egg blue that I'm starting with. because even though this is really close to the color that I need, you guys can see that the color that we're trying to match underneath here is pretty warm, and this sunny yellow is really going to warm up this blue so that I end up with a much better match. I'm not quite satisfied with this one, so we're going to add some more of that sunny yellow to get us closer to the color that we're trying to match in the paper. Being able to mix your own colors is an incredible tool for you to have as a crafter. It really gives you a lot of freedom to be able to express yourself and to really elevate your crafts. Understanding how colors work really helps to be able to do this skill even with really complicated colors. So I've matched this pretty much to what I want. So now I'm going to go in and match and just mix up a big enough batch so that I have enough paint to cover this entire section. It doesn't look like there's been a lot of change in the color, but you guys can see this is what I started with and this is what we have now. So it's a lot warmer and it's a lot more green than it is blue. So if you are a persnickety person, you may want to keep track of your ratios and document them, but y'all know I'm a hot mess, so I just mix as I go. Now that I have my color mixed the way I want, I'm going to put a base coat down just to cover up this white, and this is going to help lay a really good foundation to start our process. I noticed that a lot of people make the mistake of wanting to match the color of their paper with just like one coat of paint. But you really want to work in layers because most decoupage papers have multiple colors within the design, and you also want to try to match with whatever texture that you see in the paper. I'm using salt wash to create texture with my mixture once I've laid down my initial layer, and this is really going to help me to camouflage the edge of my paper. Luckily with this paper, there is a lot of visual texture, so my creating the physical texture with the texture medium is really going to help create a consistent look. If this were a smoother design or a decoupage paper that did not have a lot of visual texture, I could use a spatula and I could use a texture medium and spatula and use it over the edges to camouflage the edges on that project. But I'm just going to use my oval brush, which is my preference. I feel like it is less likely to leave like edge marks from your brush. And I'm going to stipple along the edge of that paper and also into the area that's not decoupaged in order to camouflage that edge. And this is really the first step in hiding or being able to camouflage where my decoupage ends and where the rest of my project starts. Now that we have our textured surface done, our next color is going to be a little deeper in value or a little darker, and it's still a pretty warm blue. And if we look at our paper, we can see that before we get to our darkest colors, there's still another layer of blue on top of the really light blue. And so this next layer is going to go over the top of this. We're not going to cover it completely, but we're just going to add another layer of color. Now for this section, I'm going to start using my tissue paper. I don't want to do a complete wash over the entire area. I just want to be able to deposit little pockets of washes on my surface. So in order to camouflage the edge of my brush or not leave any super distinct marks, I'm going to paint on top of my tissue, and it's going to disperse the paint into really organic shapes to really help aid in my effort to match the marks that are existing on the decoupage paper. I spritzed my surface and laid my paper down, and I'm also spritzing my tissue paper as well. so that I can really encourage the pigment from my paint to make it through the tissue paper and onto my edges. Y'all, this is tissue paper from the Dollar Tree. So it's not any kind of special tissue paper. You get like 100 sheets for $1.25. And this is just one of the ways that I use this tissue paper. Inside of the Roycycled membership, we experiment with different products and also processes every month. It's such a fun way to be in a community of like minded individuals who love to create in a setting where we're always learning and pushing our boundaries for what we're capable of. You'll see that I'm just depositing really light washes of this color right over the base coat that we laid down. So I don't want to go over the whole thing with the complete wash. I really just want to deposit little pockets of washes and have that lighter blue peek through. You'll note that each time I finish a layer, I go in with my dryer. And what I'm doing is I'm not just drying this section, but I'm actually using the heat from my dryer to set my paint so that when I go in with my next layer, the last layer doesn't reactivate or move. If you're using a clay-based paint, then you're going to want to seal in between each layer to make sure that you're not reactivating the last layer and that you're actually creating independent layers and not just reactivating your paint and pushing it all around again, because you really don't get that layered effect. You just end up with basically a whole new color. Now that we've completely dried the last layer, I am starting to look at the darker blues that are also in the paper. And this blue is interesting because it has a lot of red in it. So it's almost like a periwinkle, like a dark periwinkle. Um, in my color mastery class, we really learn how to deconstruct colors so that you can see them for what they are. Colors are so incredibly complicated. Anyone who's gone to Home Depot to pick out wall colors knows how many different versions of any one colors there are. So for this next step, we're going to be using Wise Owl's Atomic Blue. I'm choosing this blue again because just like the blue in the paper, this blue has a lot of red in it. So it's really a violet blue, if you will. I don't know if this color is going to work by itself, and so we are going to do another swab using our clear sticky notes. I like using the clear sticky notes too because when you compare a color when the color is wet, you don't really get like a really good idea of the color that you're wanting to use. When you are comparing a color to your surface while it's wet, you may not be getting an accurate comparison because as colors dry, they often get deeper. And so I like taking a swab and putting it on my clear sticky notes and then drying that before comparing it to the color on my project. This gives me a more accurate perception of how close my color is to my project or to the goal color that I'm trying to get to. As crafters, so often we have a lot of different paint colors on our craft tables, but they don't always look exactly the way that we need them to, right? We often need our hues to be modified a little bit. Understanding color and color theory doesn't mean that you're always mixing your colors from scratch. Sometimes it just means that you have the ability to modify the paint that you already have so that you can complete your project without having to go out and purchase a new color. Oh, that's good. I don't think I'm going to need to modify this one too much. So for our next coat, we're going to go in and again, I'm going to use the tissue paper because I want some really organic shapes. And if you look at the paper, you can see how you have like dark pigmented areas that are surrounded by like more watery, thinner looking areas of color. And so doing this over the tissue is really going to help me be able to accomplish a similar look. I'm also adding more dark towards the bottom because if you look at the paper, there's a lot more darker colors toward the bottom than there are at the top. So as I place my colors, I'm being really thoughtful to try to copy what's on the paper. When I'm painting on top of the tissue and I want more pigment, I'm really pushing my brush down. Not really hard because I don't want to tear my paper, but I'm pushing it down harder the more pigment that I want to push through. And so you guys can see how step by step, right, drawing in between each layer, we're beginning to build something that looks pretty close to the decoupage paper that we're trying to emulate. A lot of my crafting besties don't think maybe that color theory is for them. A lot of people believe that color theory is for artists and not necessarily for creatives or for crafters. But the reality is, if you're working with color, the more you understand color and how it works, the more equipped you are to create the beautiful things that you have in your heart, right? So for us, it's all about getting what we have in our hearts out of our hands and onto our projects and understanding color, how it works, how they work together can be a really, really important skill to help you to be able to do just that a lot easier. One of the skills that I've learned that has come in handy so much is dry brushing. It's one of those things that is easy to do, but a little harder to master, right? Because you want to be able to dry brush and deposit pigment without leaving marks from your brush. But it's a really good skill to learn. And so by going over and dry brushing the high points of my texture, I'm just emulating another texture that we already see in the paper and bringing that on to my board. I want to deposit a little bit more of the darker color to the bottom. So I'm going to use that same piece of tissue and I am going to deposit some more color at the bottom to make that blend out a little bit better. Now we have a word there and I'm not going to be able to copy that, but if I can just deposit some more color, I think I'll be a lot closer to what to where I want to be, and it'll look a lot more like the paper. I feel like that edge is already disappearing pretty good. What do you guys think? I use a lot of analogies when I teach, and I have one of my students who's been painting for years now, who is adamant that out of all the times that she's taken classes to understand color theory, or someone has tried to teach her, that it wasn't until my party analogy that any of it made sense to her. If you enjoy creating, crafting, upcycling, making home decor, painting furniture, be sure and join me live every Sunday at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You never know what we're going to be up to. There's a lot of chatting, but there's also a lot of crafting and a lot of teaching. I hope to see you there. So I feel like we've done a pretty good job kind of emulating those lighter, darker spots in the non-decoupaged area, I guess, a little bit more. But first, let's make sure that this layer is not just dry, but that the paint is cured with the heat so that when I go over with my next layer, I don't activate or reactivate this layer. One of the things that really help in blending your decoupage with your areas that you're actually painting is for the sheen of your areas to match. So I'm going to go over and do a layer of clear coat over everything and dry it because your colors will change when you seal them as well, right? They often get deeper and more saturated when you seal. So I'm going to seal this and dry it so that I can take a look and make sure that I'm on point with my colors before we continue to move forward. I really feel like I'm missing some of that warm color that's in there. And so I am going to go in with a different color, green, but this isn't the color I need. This is a little too deep. The value is too high. So we're going to need to lighten this up some. So I'm just going to put this down and see if I can get to that color that I'm seeing underneath there without neutralizing this paint too much. I think the hardest thing about mixing colors is understanding that you're not just darkening or lightening your color, but everything you do impacts the color when you mix it. So every time you mix any colors, you're going to neutralize the color that you have. So we have to think about the value, the darkness of the lightness. We have to think about if it's neutralized or if it's more vibrant or saturated. We have to think about maintaining the hue, right? The color that we hope to actually achieve. So there are a lot of different levers, if you will, that we're pulling when we're mixing colors. And so in our color mastery class, we really do take a deep dive into looking at those individual levers and learning how to see colors in a way that enable us to be able to mix almost what we need at any given time with what we have on our craft table already. So this one, we want it to be lighter, but when I mix the white, it's going to make it a lot cooler and it's going to really neutralize it. So I'm going to have to also warm this up. So I'm lightening this color. I'm trying to copy the hue or the color that I want. And I'm also trying to control the temperature of the color. So I'm pulling a lot of levers when I'm mixing this color, right? But having a clear understanding of how the colors work together really, really do help me in this process. Now, if you are interested in getting a better understanding of color theory, and not in the way of just like having information, but really how color theory can be used with those of us who use chalk-based paints, clay-based paints, whether you use acrylic paints, but this course is really made for crafters. So crafting and color is a master class about color theory and how we can use it in our furniture painting, home decor, art journaling, crafting projects. Now that I have the color that I want mixed, I'm going to go in and pull some of that warm light blue into the area where I'm blending my decoupage paper or the area that's not decoupaged. Again, I'm using my tissue paper because I don't want to have any distinct marks from my brush. And I want to have washes, but I do not want to have the whole area be washed. And I do see like a very specific vein in the paper. So I'm going to pull that into the area where I'm blending. And I'm also going to pull some of my color over onto the paper. So you can really unify the area that you're blending with your paper by bringing some of the color that you're using onto the actual paper, so that there is kind of some continuity from one area of your project to the next. I know this is really subtle, but I hope that you can see how bringing that warm blue down into my project is really, really helping to integrate it with the decoupage paper. So our next challenge is going to be to bring in this really, really dark color into our blend. Now, upon first glance, you may think that that is black, but it's not really so much black as it is a really, really dark blue. So we'll take our atomic blue that we used earlier, and we're gonna mix it with black in order to create that really deep color. And then we'll come in and blend some of that in as well. But before I move forward with my next layer, I'm going to make sure that this layer is not only dry, but that the heat from my craft dryer is also helped to set the last layer so it doesn't reactivate when I go over it with the next. When I use my clear sticky notes, I try and paint on a thick enough swatch so that I get a real representation of what it's going to look like when I put it on my project. And we've mixed the atomic blue with some black to create this really, really deep color. And it looks like it's black, but it really isn't. I'll show you guys when I lift the sticky note off of the board. You'll see, when you can see actually through the paint a little bit, that it's actually like a super dark blue. Once I learned how to see color, it was amazing how I just see the world a lot different. So many times when I look at a shadow, I'd see black or gray, but actually a lot of the shadows that we see are just dark blues or dark purples. It really does open up the way that you see the world and the way that you see the possibilities in your creative endeavors. And so now that I'm happy with this color, I'm going to go ahead and start depositing this on my project. Now, this was a live that I did on one of our Sunday chatting and crafting. And I got the boot, you guys. Both Facebook and YouTube kicked me off before I got to finish. But I was able to show you guys how I deposited that dark color using the tissue. And I just did this until I was happy with how much paint I deposited. And then once I was happy with this color, I went in with my Iron Orchid Design vintage texture stamp, and I stamped on some crackle onto my blended area just to kind of replicate some of the cracks that we see in the decoupage paper. And you can see how you have the dark center now, right? With the edges where it's dissipated. And I'm going to go in with my brush just straight to my board to also try and emulate some of the really, really dark values in the paper as well. And this is where my project ended up. I think I came really close. I honestly cannot tell where the decoupage stops and where my paint ends. If you guys would like a free guide with 8 pages of tips and tricks on layering your decoupage, you can use this QR code and you can sign up to receive that. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Be sure and check out the information on my masterclass below, or you can check out Roycycled Academy for other courses I teach. Otherwise, you can find me on all the places: Facebook, TikTok, Pinterest, Instagram, YouTube, all at Roycycled. Thank you so much. You guys, remember, there isn't anything that I've taught today that you cannot absolutely do. You can do this, and you can do it today. Bye.